if you were to accost someone on the street and demand, "Who's history's breakout female fine artist?" they'd probably say, "What the? I don't know. Get away from me, freak." But if they did have an answer, it'd probably be our girl from the Baroque, Artemisia Gentileschi. But the groundwork for Artemisia was laid by the very, very few recorded female artists of the late Renaissance, actually the Femmessance period. Who were these catalysts for the phenomenon? Let me tell you about four of our gals. Painter and writer Catherine of Bologna, sculptor Properzia de Rossi, and painters Sofonisba Anguissola and Lavinia Fontana. In a time where women were seen as little more than fetus incubators, their art was radical. So how did these queens come to not just learn their art, but be outspoken about it? Well, some certifiably unladylike behaviour is first credited to none other than a 15th century nun, Catherine of Bologna. Catherine was born in 1413. Before wedding God, she was raised as a lady-in-waiting in the court of Ferrara. She had a pretty cushy upbringing and an extensive education in reading, writing, art and music. Disaster would strike in 1426 after the lady she waited on had an extramarital affair, causing a severe case of decapitation for the lady. Catherine, whose employment got offed with her lady's head, was yeeted into a convent at the tender age of 13, where she'd spend the remainder of her life marinating in her incredible villain origin story and developing rebellious artistic tendencies. Fast forward to her 40s, and Catherine's elected abbess of a new convent in Bologna. Here she really let her creative freak flag fly. Her reputation as a culturati and accomplished artiste grew rapidly, though I must say, from the few surviving pieces historians have found, her work is considered a tad shite. Interestingly, her most famous literary work, The Seven Weapons, is about a spiritual battle between a religious woman whose skill and intellect directly conflict with the strict obedience demanded from the church. Despite this being the thinnest of veils, Catherine was very much adored, and still is. I mean, you can visit her embalmed corpse in Bologna today. Aside from her human jerky remains, one of Catherine's biggest legacies was the fertile atmosphere she'd cultivated in Bologna for future female artists. Cue Properzia de Rossi, a sculptor and artist born in 1419 who, like Catherine, got famous in Bologna and, unlike Catherine, was a loose unit. De Rossi's upbringing and education is a bit of a mystery. Some best guesses are she started by carving stone fruit pits, a craft she continued well into her career. She eventually leveled up, receiving a commission no woman in recorded history had so far, honing marble reliefs at the Basilica di San Petronio, which was the hottest church in Bologna at the time. This was the site of her most renowned credited work, Joseph and Potiphar's Wife, a depiction of an early scene in the Old Testament that kind of reads like a tweet Justin Baldoni's PR team would write. In short, Potiphar's wife, allegedly, begs Joseph to make sweet, sweet love to her. Then when he, allegedly, denies her, she accuses him of sexual assault. De Rossi's marble relief shows the moment where an unwilling Joseph is being pulled to bed. This scene, being carved by a woman, caused hella controversy, and it became heavily sexualized. At the time, male scribes claimed that by depicting such a tawdry scene, De Rossi was clearly expressing her own voracious sexual appetite and yearning. Are we surprised? While it's very cool and transgressive for a woman to labour over a naughty marble relief when sculpture was considered men's work, her court documents from this period may be even cooler and transgressive. These outline multiple acts of vandalism, as well as throwing paint and scratching at the eyes of one of her male peers. In her defence, he was probably mansplaining how chisels work or something. While an admirable approach, not all female artists of the era had to scratch at eyes to succeed. Some came to art the good old-fashioned way, daddy's help. Enter Sofonisba Anguissola. Born in the 1430s to a Milanese high-ranking and progressive quote-unquote girl dad, Sofonisba was given an education rare for girls at the time. She was an apprentice to two painters, Bernardino Gatti and, stay with me, Bernardino Campi. Seems Renaissance nominative determinism meant Bernardino equals artist. Sofonisba's affinity for painting was immediate. Women were high-key discouraged from painting grandiose religious scenes a la Da Vinci or Raphael, but portraiture was acceptable. Sofonisba decided to do what was acceptable exceedingly well. Her portraiture skill made her hugely successful, and her work changed the art form forever. She was even co-signed by some lesser-known male contemporaries, such as Michelangelo and Giorgio Vasari. They remarked her portraits were so lifelike they lacked only speech, almost as if, with an actual education, women can be equally skillful. Crazy. Her talent earned an invitation to the Spanish court, where she spent 14 years in residence painting royals and nobility alike. But this commercial success didn't fully temper Sofonisba's defiance, even if, as a classy dame, her jabs were more subtle and passive. For example, her work Self-Portrait with Bernardino Campi shows one of the Bernardinos not only painting her portrait, but specifically the embellishment of her jackets. A job usually assigned to an apprentice painter. This was the 16th century equivalent of a diss track, and about her former superior no less. By now in the Femmessance timeline, we've reached the late 1500s. Despite the cult of St. Catherine of Bologna, subversive sculptor and known felon Properzia de Rossi, and even the cracking commercial success of Sofonisba, working female artists are still exceptionally rare. So it's no small feat that Lavinia Fontana, a woman in her 20s, started running her own studio in Bologna. Fontana had a similarly nepo upbringing to Sofonisba. Her father was a well-known Bolognese painter who apprenticed her himself, potentially for a belief in equal opportunity, but probably out of financial necessity. Whatever the motivation, Fontana's impact would go on to far outshine her father's. Aside from being regarded as the first female career artist in Western Europe, she also painted subject matter considered gender inappropriate. Rather than staying in the portraiture lane as Sofonisba had, Fontana painted fantastical and religious scenes at scale. Fontana, the cheeky perv, was also the first female we currently know of to paint nudes. You see, art institutions loved a naked study. Because women weren't allowed to study the naked form, they weren't allowed to study at art institutions. At least not for another 300 odd years. This meant painting nudes was a difficult and controversial undertaking for Fontana. But fuck it, she was young and bold. Fontana had achieved a high level of skill, growing fame, and independent financial security, all before the age of 30, though she was yet to wed, which naturally meant her life was piteously empty. It's unclear whether she made zero effort to settle down or was simply too busy, but her family found the closest male and set him on her. The lad's name was Gian Zappi, an Italian count and also a former pupil of her father's. Bending to societal norms just a tad, Fontana agreed to marry this man, but only under the following absolutely delusional conditions. First, she kept her last name. Taking his would strip her of the name she'd made for herself and affect her business. Second, she'd only do it if her prospective husband allowed her to continue working. And third and final, there'd be no dowry. The income from her artistic employment was compensation enough for his taking on her womanly baggage. If microphones existed in 1577, Fontana would have dropped one. Zappi, the absolute feminist king, well, count, agreed to the terms and went on to be a gracious help to her and their 11 children. He even put his artistic education to use in her studio, doing apprentice work from time to time. Although Fontana was confident enough in her technique to push boundaries, she, and unfortunately the people of Bologna, considered her gender-defying larger public works complete failures. So she redirected her focus back to the feminine bread and butter, portraiture. Obviously she was good at making the people she was painting look like, you know, the people she was painting, but her skill in capturing their fineries was unmatched. In the portrait of Bianca with her pile of children, the highly detailed ruching and jewellery practically glitters. As a little interesting factoid, Bianca the portrait getter died at the age of 37, giving birth to her 19th child. 37 years old and 19 births? When was this woman ever not pregnant? My fetus incubator comment stands. Anyway, by the time Fontana reached artistic maturity and passed away, the Femmessance was yielding to the Baroque, which brings us back to where we started, Artemisia Gentileschi. Artemisia more than deserves her flowers in non-gendered art history, let alone women's art history. Just look at how dramatic the religious painting of Judith slaying Holofernes is. But her work doesn't exist in a vacuum. It has roots in the saucy St. Catherine of Bologna, using her privileged position to make art and be noisy about it, the scrappy sculptor de Rossi, the commercial successes of both Sofonisba and Fontana, and many more women who either had scarce enough historical data to fill a paragraph or are entirely lost to the annals of history. With each small defiance, the four ladies of the Femmessance inched the next generation forward, until boom, presto, some 600-ish years later, female artists still only make up about a third of gallery wall space. At least we've got this. Simply sublime. And that's all from me. See you in the next one.